Why is sugar so bad for you? We know that it rots our teeth, but it's also sneakily really good at making it so that we gain weight as well. Today I'm breaking down exactly why sugar is so awful and how it's actively working against your weight loss and wellness goals. Alright guys, if you're new to my channel and you don't know who I am, my name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's nutrition human performance. On my channel, I'm typically talking about the science back and holistic methods that you can use in order to achieve your wellness dreams. So if you have a wellness goal in mind, make sure you subscribe. Now let's define sugar, because we typically think of it as like chocolate or sweets or candy, but sugar more accurately is described as just one of the more simple forms of carbohydrates. Now those candies and sweets, as well as things like fruits, contain those simple carbohydrates that actually are really easy for the body to break down and absorb into the blood supply. But sugar also comes from all other types of digestible carbohydrates such as starches. Starches are basically just a bunch of those small sugars that are linked together to form a long chain. So you can kind of almost think of starches as those like sugar necklaces. Do you guys remember those? I think it was like a 90s thing. Now because those sugars are strung together and formed as starches, it makes it so that they're a little bit more difficult to break down and therefore a little slower release into the blood supply. And these starches are typically found in things like sweet potatoes, in grains, rice, regular potatoes, bread. But what makes each of these different food items different is that they all contain varying amount of these starches. So for example, a butternut squash is going to have way less starch than white rice, and therefore the butternut squash will not have as big of an impact on your blood glucose levels as the white rice. Now let's talk a bit about how it's actually broken down the body, because this is really important for understanding why it's not so great for us. Now, while you're chewing your first bite of food, or even occasionally when you're just thinking about food or when you smell food, your body starts to release that first batch of insulin, the storing hormone. Now, this is before the food actually even enters your GI tract. So your body is trying to prime itself for the carbohydrates that are coming into the supply, because it does take a few minutes for insulin to take effect. So it's trying to get ready for the carbohydrates that are coming. Now, one of the problems that inherently comes around with this is that insulin will automatically just start to lock up any of the fuel that's available right then. And since you don't have that energy coming into your blood supply yet because you're still chewing on it, it means that insulin starts to lock up your fat cells as well as starts to store the glucose that was already in your blood supply. And this means that you're going to get even hungrier as you start to eat because insulin has removed those fuel sources. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, like when you're out to a restaurant and you didn't think that you're very hungry, but then when you start to see the waiters bring out food and you think it's yours, you get really hungry in the anticipation of this. This is that pre-burst of insulin that's coming into play, making it so that you're even more hungry before you start to really digest that food. So when insulin is present, that means that fat burning is not, because your body is in that storing mode, not in the burning mode. And to top it all off, all of the sugars or starches that you might be eating from that meal, because insulin is present, is being directly shuttled into that storing mode as well. Now, the degree of this insulin response will really depend on how many of those carbohydrates or those simple sugars that you're eating at that meal and how quickly they're absorbed. Now, this comes back to a concept called glycemic load, which really just covers how each food has a different impact on how quickly it's absorbed into our blood supply, which, going back to that butternut squash example, butternut squash is going to have a much lower glycemic load and therefore a much lower response on insulin than white rice. But if you're to take it a step even further outside of those more whole food sources, let's say you go to a coffee shop and you get a vanilla latte that has about 35 grams of added sugar, as well as a cinnamon roll that has, I don't even know how many grams of sugar, but I can safely say it has more than butternut squash. That combined will have an even larger effect on insulin because there's more carbohydrates and simple sugars that are rapidly being absorbed into your blood supply, and therefore more insulin is needed in order to store it. Now, if you're having something that's sugar dense, like up to once a week, that's not going to cause the chronic problem or the chronic issue with weight loss. But a lot of people are having these things on a daily basis, which is making it so that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to tap those fat burning mechanisms because insulin is so high. And this results in something called hyperinsulinemia, which is that constant state of high insulin. Now, what's crazy is that this impact that sugar has had, or this concentration of sugar has had on our diet, is a pretty fairly recent phenomenon. If you guys haven't read The Case Against Sugar by Gary Taubes, highly recommend it because it really goes over the history of the introduction of sugar into our diet. And when it comes to nutrition, understanding the history of nutrition is almost, if not equally as important as understanding the science. Because believe it or not, a lot of what we know today to be true is based off of a lot of really poorly done science back in the 50s and 60s. Now, I find the whole history of nutrition fascinating because it is actually very important for understanding nutrition itself. So I do want to do more videos on that, and I do want to bring someone on who is very well versed in the history of nutrition. So if you guys want more of a history of nutrition, let me know in the comments below and I'll try and make that happen. So sugar not only makes it so that it shuts off fat burning, but insulin itself, which is secreted when you consume sugar, is so uniquely efficient at making you hungry by locking up those fat cells and alternative fuel sources. This means that the more sugar-dense foods that you eat, the less fat you'll burn and the hungrier that you'll be, which will also perpetuate that cycle. Now, if you have a weight loss goal in mind and you're finding that sugar is particularly part of the problem, I have a really great video on how you can actually stop eating sugar with 2 simple steps right here. Also, if you love the science-backed information on how you can achieve your wellness goals, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out with new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.